What's up guys, Mitch from Shock Therapy, and today on this instructional video we're going to be showing you how to install the spring kit on the Polaris General XP. This spring kit is going to do multiple things for you. Number one, it's going to increase the ride height of the vehicle itself. Number two, it's also going to prevent the bucking that is prone in the rear of the car. And number three, it's also going to promote the plushness factor in the entire car. Another benefit of our spring kit is that it's going to smooth out the ride quality of the car itself. It'll also help promote the bump stage when you decide to hit something big. This install should take no longer than 2 to 3 hours, so let's jump on in. I'm going to show you how to do it.
The first step is to jack the front of the car up until the tires are just off the ground. Make sure that you use jack stands at all times for safety. Next, remove the hardware holding the shocks to the vehicle. Start with the bottom hardware first, finishing with the upper hardware. Remove one shock at a time as they are side specific and you should not mix them up. With the shock in the vise, lower the factory bump stop on the shock shaft at least 3 to 4 inches. Compress the spring system and remove the lower spring perch. Save the factory spring divider, but discard the factory springs. Next, set the preload collar and crossover heights. Set the preload collar to 1 3/4 inches. This is measured with a tape measure, butted up against the factory bridge. Next, disassemble the crossover and prepare to install it on the shock. Install the crossover ring on the shock body at 3.5 inches. This is also measured from the bridge of the shock. Make sure that the crossover ring is installed with the recessed groove in the bottom of the crossover facing the shock shaft direction of the shock. Next, tighten all the hardware for the crossover. Install the silent crossover O-ring. If you installed the crossover ring correctly, it should sit in a recessed groove. Next, install the Shock Therapy dual rate spring kit. Starting with the upper spring first, make sure the part number on the spring is right side up. But since the shock is upside down in the vise, the logo will also be upside down at this point. Install the factory spring divider. The long end of the spring divider will face the shock shaft. Next, install the lower spring with the logo the correct direction. Compress the system and install the lower spring perch. Now you can install the shock back on the UTV. Start with the upper hardware first. Next, install the lower hardware. Make sure that you leave all of the hardware loose. Later on in the installation, you might find it easiest to adjust ride height by taking the shock off the vehicle. Repeat these steps on the opposite side. both shocks on the front of the UTV, you can remove the jack stands and lower the car back on the ground. Now jack up the back of the General until the tires are off the ground. Use jack stands for safety. Start by removing one shock at a time. Lower hardware first and then the upper hardware. These shocks are side specific, so do not mix them up. With the shock in the vise, lower the bump stop on the shock shaft about 2 to 3 inches. Compress the spring system and remove the factory spring perch. Discard the springs, but save the factory spring divider. With the shock in the vise, you can set the preload collar and crossover ring locations. Preload in the rear should be set at 1 3/4 inches, just like the front. Next, disassemble the crossover and prepare to install it on the shock. The crossover should be installed at 3.5 inches, just like the front. Make sure it's installed with the recessed groove facing the shock shaft. With the crossover ring tightened, make sure you install the silent O-ring. Next, install the upper spring and then the spring divider. Spring divider should be installed with the long end facing the shock shaft. Next, install the lower spring. Compress the system and install the lower spring perch. You can now install the shock back on the UTV. Make sure that you start with the upper hardware first, ending with the lower hardware, keeping both of them loose until later on in the instructions. Repeat these steps on the other side. Both shocks on the vehicle, you can lower the car back on the ground once you've removed the jack stands. With the General on the ground, you can now settle the suspension. You cannot do this merely by jumping up and down on the car. You must get in it and move it back and forth at least in the driveway a couple of times, if not, drive around the block. The last time that you come to a stop, try to do so without hitting the brakes. With the driver remaining in the UTV, check the ride height in the front. This is measured from the ground up to the bottom of the frame at the lower control arm rear pivot point. This measurement should be 14 inches. If your ride height is correct, then check the gap on the crossover ring. In the front, it should have about 1.5 inches of gap between the bottom of the crossover and the spring divider. Next, check the rear ride height. This is measured from the ground to the bottom of the frame at the rear of the UTV. This should be 13.5 inches. The rear crossover gap should be 2.5 inches from the bottom of the crossover ring to the black spring divider. If your ride heights are not perfect to start with, as every UTV is different, you may have to adjust that up or down. We find that it's easier to adjust the ride height by removing the shock from the vehicle, placing it back in the vise, and raising or lowering the preload collar accordingly. All preload adjustments are about a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you need to raise or lower the front of the vehicle 1 inch, you're going to move the preload collar 1/2 inch. This ratio applies to the rear as well. Knowing this in advance, you should be able to adjust the preload one time and nail the ride heights. Once you've made your preload adjustments, make sure that you settle the suspension again by driving the UTV. Check your ride heights with the driver in the vehicle.
$13.5. Cool.
If your ride heights are perfect, it's now time to lock down all of the factory hardware, and your installation is complete.
We hope that this video helped you in the installation of your spring kit at home. And as always, we recommend to check the ride height after the first 100 to 300 miles and adjust it accordingly. Another important point is to make sure that you are checking the ride height with you in the car. And always remember that if you are adding weight or subtracting weight, it's also going to affect the ride height. So make sure that the ride heights are always where we recommend them. Our springs are made in the USA and they are warranted for life. This is the #1 thing that we always recommend to start with as your suspension component. Now, if you like the spring kit, don't forget that you can pair it with the RAS system for the ultimate ride quality of the car. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to receive notifications anytime that we post a new video. If you have any other questions about the spring kit on this car or any other product that we offer, please give us a call at 623-217-4959. And if you're looking to order any of our products online, visit our website at www.shocktherapist.com. This is going to be a long one, Josh.
No, it's not.
This is going to be a long one.
Chase, how's your balls?
I think it took a full 72 hours to recover from that, my friend. You're the first person to full-on punch me in my junk, and it changed my life. It's literally kind of like reset me as an individual.
Hey Chase, did you talk to your mom and have her refill my minutes? Because we didn't get to FaceTime last night.
Jesus Christ. Hit something big. Yes, sir. All right, that's how
Now you're
that's
just-
how I feel about today, Josh.
Now you're just.
The fuck?
You like Kodak Black?
Is that a type of chewing tobacco?
No.
No, Josh, that's a rapper.
I've never heard of him.
Apparently. Get you feeling nice. Yes. And you can find Jason DiLorenzo at Jason_DiLorenzo.
Is that his OnlyFans?
Yeah, OnlyFans. I've never seen it, but I think Josh has.
Real quick moment. I'd like to thank Red Bull.
Ooh, no more 5 hour?
No, they gave me up. If I was really cool, I would have fucking punched my thumb through it and shotgunned it like Josh.
You'll get there.
See? Got you, Josh.
Thank you.
It's gross. It's really gross. That's so gross.
Ow! Saw that. I want to go home. Nice.
Nice.